Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Cybersecurity Insiders webinar, where we'll be discussing the future of content security and how zero trust and real-time analysis are changing the game. I'm Holger Schulze, the founder of Cybersecurity Insiders, a community that proudly serves over 600,000 cybersecurity professionals. And I'll be your moderator today. Today's webinar is brought to you by Votiro. And Votiro proactively detects and disarms file-borne threats to deliver enterprises with increased security and productivity. Now, before we begin, let me share some quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the questions window in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll address your questions during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. And additional materials, including the 2023 Content Security Report, as well as an e-guide on Zero Trust content security, are available for download in the handout section. Finally, this webinar is being recorded for your convenience, and we will make the recording available to you after the event. All right, now, as digital threats continue to rapidly evolve, right, protecting content across various channels like email, web browsers, file transfers, and cloud apps is becoming more pressing than ever. And in today's webinar, we will dive into the latest findings from the 2023 Content Security Survey, and we'll explore, some of the best practices for protecting your content, including intelligent strategies for emerging threats, zero trust content security, addressing file-borne threats, and real-time data analysis. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's expert presenter for this deep dive into content security. Please welcome Eric Avigdor, and Eric is VP of Product Management at Votiro. Hello, Eric. Thank you for presenting today.
Hey, Holger, and thanks for inviting me. And thank you and thank your team at Cybersecurity Insiders for running this survey with us, which actually came up with some super interesting results. So happy to join you all, and I think I hope you find this interesting.
Excellent. Well, Eric, let's dive right in. Tell us more about Votiro and content security.
Right, so I think you gave a really good introduction, Holger, to what Votiro does, right? Votiro deals with the problem, which is that 80% of hacks happen through file-borne threats. What that means is that a file that has been weaponized can be used in order to infiltrate an organization. And a file can come in many forms and can come in through many entry points. And I think one of the things that always surprises me is that when we meet companies, we meet companies that are new to the concept, we really always start by asking a first question, which is, let's try to figure out what the current risk and attack surface is for your organization before we even talk about what can be done. Because only when we really understand the attack surface, we can determine at what risk level are we, and whether we should be putting budget and resources behind that type of problem. So through some of the questions that we've asked during the survey, we found some interesting observations and perceptions that companies might have. And when we asked our customers and prospects and companies where they think that most files enter their organization, if you look at the top three are interesting enough: email, which is 74% of the respondents. Half of the respondents responded that a collaboration tool is an entry point, either a collaboration tool, think about Slack or Teams or any other collaboration tool, as well as cloud storage where files are being uploaded. And half of the respondents also perceived that files enter the organization through web downloads. A slightly different question was asking which of these channels is perceived to be the most vulnerable for file-borne threats. And we saw a great correlation there. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side, a third believe that email is very vulnerable, then content collaboration, cloud storage, and web downloads. That is, on one hand, very true. For many, many years, email was indeed a significant attack surface, simply because there were many ways to weaponize files and create emails or craft emails that would really lure someone into opening an attachment and launching an attack. However, and this is something really interesting that we've seen both in the survey and through discussions with a very large number of CISOs in several events lately and in webinars. Look at that fourth category, which is file uploads. That's actually really interesting to me, that respondents have believed that only 13% of them believe that file uploads are a vulnerability for their organization, for file-borne threats. When we spoke with CISOs, that was the initial perception. But when we dug a slight step deeper into what file uploads actually mean, when you think about the customer-facing portals or partner-facing portals, where partners, customers, contractors, third-party upload files into your environments, that actually is super risky. These are non-trusted users from external organizations uploading content into your network or applications, which are then being consumed by users and endpoint within the organization. If we don't have a whole lot of trust in between these the cybersecurity stances of these organizations, how do we protect ourselves? So interesting observation there. And I'd like to take this even a step forward. And here, Holger, I know we've been discussing this lately, right? When the problem is so broad and the attack surface is so broad, what is it that we can do in order to protect ourselves from such threats? I'd like to start by introducing some basic elements, some basic ideas on what can be done before we even talk about types of threats and types of mitigation and additional benefits for mitigating file-borne threats. The approach Votiro took was something that we've coined as zero trust content security. And yes, zero trust is a big term, right? Everybody uses it nowadays. Some of us use it for the right reasons and some less. But the fundamental concepts of zero trust are that no one should be trusted implicitly when entering a network, when using an application. We took the same concepts and we've applied them to files and content security by asserting that no file should be trusted. It is not that 10% of files should not be trusted and all other 90 should be allowed into our network and onto our endpoints. We assume that 100% of the files should never be trusted, and as such, need specific treatment in order to make them safe for a user to interact with. A second point I'd like to raise is that when you think about file-borne threats, many of us think about antiviruses, right? I have a virus within a file, my antivirus will catch it and will block it and I will be safe. There's a challenge there, and that challenge is called zero-day attacks. Zero-day attacks, just to put things in order, are attacks that have not been seen yet in the market, in the wild, and could be potentially variants of an existing attack or completely new novel attacks that have been released again into the wild. And AVs are not even antivirus, antivirus systems are not even yet aware of that signature, that type of attack. So as such, we have a gap. There's a new attack. We do not have defenses to protect against an attack. What do we do? And there are tools out there that attempt to deal with zero-day attacks. One of the better technologies that does that is an EDR, an endpoint detection and response system, which instead of looking only at known signatures, also looks at behavior. The challenge there is that an EDR only looks at the problem once it actually has landed on an endpoint. and then tries to look for malicious behavior which is already occurring on the endpoint. So the question arises, what can we do? How do we deal with these types of threats? Additional topics that we'll talk about later on are how do we use the analytics provided by such a platform? How can we innovate in our systems and processes to provide better content security using the newest and latest and greatest technologies? I'd like to raise a point. Antiviruses are put in place for a great reason. We know that, and we'll talk about some statistics in a few minutes, how many companies are using them and how effective they are. But as a side note, an additional technology was put in place in order to deal with those less known variants which do not carry a known signature, and that is something that is called a sandbox. A sandbox was basically developed in order to take a file which is suspicious, detonate it within a safe environment. So instead of letting it explode on your endpoint, let's put it on a separate virtual environment. Let's let it try to carry out its malicious activities. And as we observe it, we will be able to see whether it is attempting something which is malicious. And if it does, we will block it. While that is a somewhat effective means of identifying a malicious file, the challenge with that still is that it takes time. You send over a file to a sandbox, the user needs to wait for their file. And I'm sure that none of you want to wait for an attachment on an email or for an attachment sent over Slack or for a file that you're downloading through a specific website, whether a business application or not. You would not want to wait minutes or hours or days for a file that was for some reason blocked, right? So there's a challenge there. The second phase of the usability problem of the current technology. And this is where zero trust content security comes into play to try to solve several problems: the security risks, the usability risks, and another point which we'll talk about in a few minutes, IT efficiencies.
So Eric, the problem and the attack surface is so broad, right? What can we do about this?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, because the attack surface definitely is very broad, and we cannot solve everything in one day. But I'd like to, before we even solve this, let's look at whether we're even aware of the problem, or how confident are we that we are aware of the problem. When we asked through the survey, together with Cybersecurity Insiders, we asked the audience, what did you put in place currently? What do you have in place to mitigate this type of threat? And here's an interesting mix of statistics. So 81% mentioned they use antivirus, 76% use firewalls, 72% use secure email gateways. So you see, I mean, we have here a very broad deployment of solutions that are intended to prevent file-borne threats. But let's talk about another statistic. We asked, when you, Mr. Customer, when you choose a security solution, what is the main factor in choosing that specific solution? Is it cost? Is it efficiency? Is it what exactly drives you to make a buying decision? And interesting enough, 74%, so 3 out of 4 companies, mentioned on their top 3 effectiveness against advanced threat. This is a point we need to dwell on for a moment, because it is not cost, it is not ecosystem, it is effectiveness against advanced threat, not generalized threat, advanced threat. Companies are worried about advanced threat types, zero-day attacks, that would put their company in a pickle, in a problem, obviously. And the question becomes then, how confident are they that what they have in place actually solves the problem? So we asked that question, how many of you believe that your current solution is good and helping you solve that problem? And interesting, nearly half of those responders believe that the current solutions that they have in place is efficient. So let's take a step back. Let's look at these statistics. Between 70 to 80% have antivirus and firewall and secure email gateways. Half of them believe that those solutions are good in solving that problem, which also means that half of them believe that they don't, but let's leave that aside for a moment. And 3/4 of them choose a solution to be effective against advanced threat. So with that level of confidence, we have to ask the question, and I'll move here on to this, which is, then how are 71% of all responders still believing that their organization has been breached in the past 12 months, in most cases through file-borne threats? And what that leads me to believe, and to be honest, we have many points correlating here to that same exact understanding that we are gaining lately through this survey and through discussions with many CISOs on events lately, that there is a gap in understanding of how file-borne attacks work, on what exactly the attack surface is, and what exactly can be done to prevent that. Because if we have solutions in place which we believe are doing the job, but for a fact are not doing the job, if 71% of us believe that we may have been attacked recently, 38% of us say, yes, definitely we were breached lately by this type of attack. What can we do?
So Eric, that's an interesting gap, right? So confidence seems super high, but still taken together, was it 71% of professionals who know or think the organization has been breached? That's an alarmingly high number. How can we resolve this gap?
Yeah, so I think the first step obviously is always understanding the breadth of the problem, right? The first step is understanding the attack surface. And the attack surface can be broken down in two very different ways. The first one would be, where are files coming in through, right? We need to start looking at email as an entry point, collaboration as an entry point, downloads, browser downloads as an entry point, file uploads from external sources, which we talked about earlier, right? That is another interesting entry point. But then you also have that shadow IT piece, which is, my engineering team is using an S3 bucket to upload data for many different reasons, for engineering reasons, for training a machine learning model, which we'll talk about later on. What about business applications, Salesforce, ServiceNow? I could mention 100 of them. These SaaS applications carry an enormous amount of content which is being uploaded from many directions. How do we make sure that when we consume that information, that is safe? So I think to answer your question, Holger, the first exercise is a discovery exercise of where do files exist? Where are they coming in from? Then we understand the attack surface. The second question we need to ask, and this is actually interesting enough, a question we asked the responders of this survey is, what types of files concern you most? Yeah, files are coming in from everywhere, but what type of files are the highest risk? And we got here actually a very accurate response and a very good understanding of how threats work. And there's actually a reason for it. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation. If you look at the top 3 responses, 56% believe that archived files are the worst, right? Zip files, password protected files, and they're actually very correct. That is a very correct answer. We've been seeing a massive amount of attacks lately. If you think about the Casbanero attack against financial institutions in Latin America, it all starts with a zipped password protected file, which carries a weaponized file inside, sent to a user. Because it's a zipped password protected files, it zips through your defenses, flies through your antivirus and sandbox and EDR, which really don't know what to do with a password protected encrypted file. And those files detonate on the endpoint, they do what they need to do, and you are breached. So that definitely is an interesting area to look into. And that is actually that we solve at Votiro. We do allow password protected files to be consumed. They're opened by the user. We sanitize them. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, and we keep them safe, but this definitely is a risky entry point. A second vector of attack is Microsoft Office documents, which obviously is most probably the main leading cause for the end resulting file format that is used in order to attack an organization. This can be a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, PowerPoint. It's super easy to send someone a phishing-based attack. Then once phished, I send an email as if I am your CEO or your VP marketing, and I send a document to a colleague, and that document carries a whole lot of malicious content within that. And that happens for two reasons. One is we trust files, we trust Office documents. The second one is that, for those who do not know this, a Microsoft Office document is actually not a single document. It actually is a whole host of, a whole tree of underlying files that assemble that final document. So when you open a single file, actually 10, 20, or 30 underlying objects are activated to run that file. And 6 or 7 layers deep into that file, guess what you can find? An executable, a binary, something interesting that could actually launch an attack. Third, which doesn't lag far behind, is PDFs. PDFs are used everywhere, super easy to weaponize in many different ways, and as such can be used in order to launch an attack. So circling back on the question, first step is let's address and let's figure out, let's discover where files are coming in through. Then let's look at what type of files are actually used and sent over these different mediums. And the third step would be, let's figure out whether we're restricting the business. So for example, and we'll see this in a few minutes, one of the solutions that is out there today, which doesn't really work, is let's just block all archived files. When an organization realizes how risky it is, they simply block the exchange of zipped file, which really limits the business. So we can get there in a few seconds.
So Eric, Votiro detects and disarms malicious content, right? But it also provides analytics. What are the benefits out of leveraging, threat-related analytics? Can you tell us more about that?
So Holger, as you mentioned, Votiro detects and disarms threat, but it also analyzes and provides rich analytics. And the question becomes, why is that so important for security operation teams and security teams that work within SOCs? And I think the aspect of threat prevention is key. That is why we exist. There are two secondary reasons. One is obviously shortening the time to resolution of a zero-day attack. But the second one, and sometimes even more important, is the efficiency of that security team in the SOC. So we've asked the responders on what exactly have you put in place up until now to defend against zero-day attacks within files, and how has that impacted your business processes and your companies? And here we got a really interesting response. So nearly half of the responders say that the current solutions they have in place have increased their IT workload. So folks working within a security operations center or security teams have an increased workload because of the solutions that they've put in place. Let's give an example of what that means. Imagine that files are coming in and they are blocked by an antivirus or sent to be quarantined within a sandbox. What happens next? The end user calls the IT team saying, hey, I have a file, I'm waiting for it, it's legitimate, please release it for me. What happens next is that the IT admin or the threat researcher goes into that file, analyzes it, and if it is safe, they release the file. That takes a whole lot of time and effort from the IT team and from the SOC. So apparently, while some of these solutions are somewhat efficient, from a threat prevention perspective, they actually incur a whole lot of workload on these teams. But then a second problem arises, because 37% of the responders, which actually is a somewhat low number compared to what we're seeing in the market, but 37% of the responders said that the current solutions actually drive user complaints. So back to that same story we just talked about, imagine that file being blocked or quarantined. If I'm a user, I'm waiting for my file. That is super frustrating that I need to reach out and wait a minute or a day or a week until that file actually is delivered to me so I can move on with my day. What if that document is a resume, right? I'm an HR person waiting for a resume. Or what if I'm a salesperson waiting to download a purchase order, an invoice, right? That holds back the business. So that actually was summarized nicely by half of the responders saying that the current solutions they have in place are slowing down the business process. And if you think about that, slowing down the business process, a great example is when IT security teams decide to block a zipped file. There's no solution in place for that nowadays. Let's just block these files because they're risky. Great, but we're holding back the business. So that's not so great. So how do we solve that? Back to the analytics piece. Some of these analytics can be used by the IT security team in SOC in order to realize where some of the business processes are less efficient and where they need to introduce newer solutions into their security stack in order to facilitate business efficiency and in order to help and become an enabler for the business instead of slowing down the business. A second side of analytics and threat-related analytics is that the more information we can provide about threats that we find within files, the better that SOC is equipped in order to go threat hunt and find those the zero-day attacks and variants within additional environments. So back to where we talked about the risk surface, if we've found that type of risk within email, it most probably has found its way into other systems as well. So let's go find that. This is where these analytics really come into play with threat hunting.
Now, Eric, many files carry information, right, that is privacy related or somehow sensitive and therefore subject to regulations, right, or compliance. So among the compliance mandates that companies in our survey must comply with, HIPAA takes the lead, right, with, what is it here, 60% of respondents, followed by the CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, at 40% and GDPR at 36%. Eric, how should companies mitigate those, compliance-related risks within files?
Right, that's we've been hearing a lot about the data protection and privacy and compliance-related challenge that many companies are facing right now. It's not a new problem. It is a problem we know very well from the past few years. It just got much worse lately. And the reason it got worse is because our data is now everywhere. It's been growing in its cloud presence throughout the past decade, but there's now an explosion of data everywhere across hybrid environments, on-prem and cloud. And it just makes it so much more difficult for companies to remain in compliance, let alone achieve compliance, but even remain in compliance is a challenge now. And yeah, you're right, Holger. I mean, HIPAA and GDPR, PCI, all of these privacy-driven regulations, which enforce that we not only encrypt our data, but that we keep it safe, so it cannot be exfiltrated. So I think when we talk about how do we solve this problem, let's circle back to where we started with malware, and I think you will see some interesting adjacencies here. The first thing is we first need to have visibility. We need to understand where the problem lies. And when we asked the survey responders, a third of them said they don't have visibility into channels where they receive files. That's a very worrying statistic, because if a third of the companies that we've surveyed don't have a good grasp on where files are coming in through, how exactly are they planning to be compliant where those files could potentially carry PII, PHI, PCI, where information within those files could definitely put them in breach of any compliance regulation. So the first step is we need visibility. We need to know, in addition to our databases, which hold information, where is unstructured data coming in through? Is unstructured data coming in through email and collaboration tools and uploads and downloads, and all of these different entry points, in addition to carrying malware, can also carry privacy-related information. And I think one of the interesting things that we've seen lately is that in the past, the traditional way of dealing with this problem is put in place your DLP, right? Your data loss prevention product, which worked for a while, but really for a long time has presented a challenge, because usually data classification, which runs on an existing set of information, you have a million files in storage, you run your engines on that folder, you've just cleansed it entirely or you've classified it entirely, and you're good. What happens 2 minutes later? 1,000 new files are dumped into that storage and the problem starts from scratch. So you need to keep running on that existing storage again and again and again in order to ensure that data is classified correctly and is not sent out or used in malicious manner. So if visibility is step number one, step number two needs to be, let's look at enforcement. How do we ensure that the content moving, the lifeblood of our business, moving in between different environments, how do we ensure that that content is safe from a regulation and compliance standpoint? It has to happen in real time. This is not something we can run statically on a set of data. This has to happen not only in real time, but it has to be active 100% of the time to ensure that that PII is not reaching where it should not. So here, I want to take a step back and give you a very high-level overview of what Votiro does before we talk about advanced threats. Votiro, as we mentioned earlier, detects, disarms, and analyzes known and unknown file-borne threats. Let's talk about what that means. The known threats could be known malicious content, known malware-based attacks which could reside within files. We detect those, we block those as needed. The unknown threats are those bits and pieces within files that could be malicious but are not yet known to the market. The technique that Votiro uses is called content disarm and reconstruction, which was also patented by Votiro in a technology that is called positive selection. What that means is that the known good bits within a file, the known good content, and whether that be text or images or macros or everything that makes a file rich in content and usable, is actually carried on to the final file that is resulting out of the content disarm and reconstruction process, leaving behind all of those unknown bits that should never have been there in the first place. The resulting file is as close as possible to 100% safe, where all malicious content known and unknown has been removed. That is how this type of technology provides a superior level of defense against zero-day attacks. You could apply that same logic to privacy-related information. How do we ensure that files do not carry privacy and compliance-related data when they are delivered to the end user?
So Eric, looking ahead and looking at the sort of evolution, right, of attacks and advanced attacks, what role does AI play both on the attack side and perhaps also preventative? And how can content security help us prevent AI-based attacks?
Yeah, Holger, that's a hot topic. Everyone now is digging into the AI and machine learning pie. So I think let's start by recognizing the breadth of the problem, or at least the perceived breadth. when we asked the responders which cybersecurity threats or challenges do they expect to become more prevalent in the next 2 to 3 years, the first one was phishing. That's an obvious one, right? 60% of responders said phishing. That's been a big one for years now, and it will absolutely continue to be definitely a dominant vector of attack. But what's interesting is that half of the responders, which is the second largest response here, said AI-based attack. So let's pause for a moment and let's think about what that actually means. Because when you think about the type of attack, you think about phishing or ransomware or credential theft or insider threat. AI-based attack is just a means of achieving one of these attacks, right? AI-based attack is not, let's demystify this, right? This is not a robot attacking us, in a science fiction manner. This is just a means that a software engineer could use in order to improve their likelihood of succeeding with an attack. But interesting enough, it is raising a whole lot of alarm bells and concerns, and for the right reasons. Why? Because if you think about phishing, phishing can be dramatically improved when using artificial intelligence and machine learning. A phishing message can be crafted by a machine learning model or by a large language model to be highly likely to be opened by that specific end user, because the language would be so much more appropriate and correct for that specific situation that would make it more likely for the user to end up clicking on that link. Same goes for ransomware. If you think about AI being used by players that are not as skilled as needed in order to launch a ransomware attack, AI can be used to write malicious code, which is extremely efficient at infiltrating into an organization. And same as in phishing, AI can be used then in order to analyze that ransomware attack and to make it more efficient in order to be able to exfiltrate quicker more data and to reach that end goal of achieving the financial value of a hack. So AI is definitely being used in order to shorten attacks, to make them more efficient. But artificial intelligence in general and machine learning can also be used by the good guys, right? We have been at Votiro, we've been using machine learning for the past over 2 years in order to train machine learning models that help us identify good content. That's actually a unique approach, right? Instead of using machine learning and AI in order to identify malicious content, we use it as part of our positive selection technology to identify those benign and those good bits and macros and links and content that are positive and are needed by the end user, so we can actually pass them over to the user so the user can be efficient at carrying out their job, their daily job. What is left behind is obviously that unknown bad. So I'd say the first angle is let's leverage AI and machine learning in meaningful ways that truly are not only marketing slogans, right? Not only marketing fluff, but truly are meaningful in the sense that they help us defend also against AI-based attacks. But a second point that I'd like to raise here, and this is where we can, I think, finish up this type of discussion, is think about your engineering teams that are most probably trying themselves to use machine learning or machine learning models or AI in general in order to maybe improve a business process or maybe improve customer experience. And in order to do that, what happens is that a group of engineers collects an enormous amount of data, which in many cases might be in files, and that content is being uploaded into storage, maybe an S3 bucket, right? Unstructured storage. That data is being then used to train a machine learning model. So let's think about this. We've just spoken about how content can be malicious within files. Imagine those thousands or hundreds of thousands of files that are used within an S3 bucket in order to train a machine learning model. What if 20 or 50 or 100 of those are malicious, are basically poisoned data. That can result in many different problems, because it can result in a wrong model that basically provides the wrong results. It could also provide a very interesting playing ground for hackers to poison data that is used for training machine learning models, which would then be consumed by those engineers, would infect their endpoint, and could be an entry point for many different types of denial of service attacks and ransomware attacks and a whole host of new problems. So I think with that, Holger, that is all we had. Very interesting survey results that point out both to a better understanding of file-based threats, or how file-borne threats can impact an organization, but also hint at the fact that there's still a gap in understanding that attack vector, and we can help educate and help discover that type of problem, which is exactly why Votiro exists.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. There are a couple of audience questions coming in, but before we go there, I see your QR code on your slide. Tell us a little bit more about the information and next steps that folks on this webinar can take to learn more about Votiro and your solution.
Happy to do so. So you can always reach out to us and we can schedule calls, but the easiest way to understand what the Votiro platform does is if you scan this QR code, it will take you to a free trial, which you can use in order to understand how Votiro helps protects content within emails, collaboration tools, browser downloads, portal uploads, and every possible use case where files exist.
Very good. All right, let's tackle a few audience questions, shall we? But before we dive in, just a quick note to our audience: we would like to hear, what's on your mind. So if you have any questions you'd like us to address, please type them into the questions window on your GoToWebinar control panel. And this is, your chance to tap into the expertise we have here today with Eric. All right, let's see. Eric, the first question: our company is very budget focused. How can we justify adding another tool to our tech stack?
Right, and I think for that, definitely reach out to us. We can share a good amount of material on return on investment, and I think it comes into play in two main reasons. One is the cost of a breach. We know that files are an entry point for breaches, and we know that most companies that have been breached in many cases by, or in most cases by zero-day attacks. Current defenses, we've shown that throughout the session, are not sufficient in order to protect you from zero-day attacks. So the cost of a single breach a year would be much more expensive than putting a solution for that problem in the first place. A second angle I would look at is I've seen many companies use legacy technologies which were good for a legacy use case, but attempting to use that same technology in a new use case. I'll give you an example. Sandboxes, which worked well for legacy environments, are attempted to be used in some cases in more modern cloud-forward use cases, which are highly inefficient. In those use cases, these technologies can be displaced using content disarm and reconstruction, which is what Votiro does, and an enormous amount of cost can be prevented. I'd say that for the email use cases, some secure email gateways that are being modernized are another source that we're seeing our customers save significant amount of budget by introducing more modern technologies.
Thank you, Eric. That makes perfect sense. All right, let's see. The next question: how worried should we be of malware being created by artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT? Eric?
I love that question because obviously my answer would be we should not be worried because worrying won't help. What we should do is take action. But now, I mean, obviously jokingly, with a bit more of a serious response, I'd say that is already happening, right? Artificial intelligence and machine learning are being used by hackers all over the world to create actually two different interesting vectors. One is the cyberware, the creation of software that is malicious. And a second way is actually crafting cyber risk as a service, basically services provided by malicious actors to actors that want to breach but do not have the means of doing that or the sophistication. And those service companies, quotes, provide a much more, I'd say, interesting or relevant attack surface using AI and machine learning. So definitely a topic that we should be looking at closely and reacting very quickly to.
Very good. Thank you, Eric. It looks like we have time for one more question. And the question is, what's the best way to reduce risk when you don't own or fully manage the network or infrastructure, endpoints, etc.?
Right. So that comes mainly from the understanding that we used to own the network, right? We used to have a corporate network in a data center in our office. It was all secured. We put guards around it and physical access. And now our network's everywhere, right? It's in the cloud, it's on-prem, it's hybrid. We don't really own anymore our network and what's in it. The only thing we do own is our content, our data. So as long as we can keep that data and our content secure, regardless of wherever it resides, we should be good. We should be safe. The question becomes, how do we do that? And obviously, Votiro plays a significant role in making sure that content, specifically unstructured data, files moving around, all of these in cloud and hybrid environments, we ensure that they are safe to be used, both from a malware prevention standpoint as well as a privacy standpoint.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. That, by the way, was a perfect closing statement. And I definitely want to extend a big thank you, Eric, to you for sharing your expert insights on file and content security and CDR today. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Holger, and thank you for hosting us on this fabulous webcast and the very interesting results of the survey ran by you and the Cybersecurity Insider team.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Now, and with that, we're at the finish line of today's session. We navigated through some important, file and content security related challenges today, and I hope we provided good level of clarity, right, and some guidance on actionable solutions for all of you. And just as a quick note, if we couldn't get to all of your questions today, don't worry. We'll be following up with everyone in our audience to answer those questions over the next few days. And also, please keep an eye out for a follow-up email that will also include a link to the webinar recording. Now, in closing, I want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure hosting this conversation. I sincerely hope you found this webinar as informative as I did. My name is Holger Schulze, and you've been listening to a Cybersecurity Insiders webinar. And I look forward to welcoming you again at one of our future webinars. Now, until then, take care and have a wonderful day.